Welcome back. Today we're going deep into the woods with a story series I am calling Camping Trips That Went Wrong. Now, I know what you're thinking. Campfire horror is a genre unto itself, right? Yeah, creaky cabins, strange sounds in the night, the whole deal. But what I've tried to do with this series is find stories that feel genuinely real. Some of these came from Reddit threads, some from personal accounts people submitted to forums, some from local news buried so deep in the internet you'd never find them unless you were really looking. And that's kind of the point. These aren't polished urban legends. These are the kind of stories people tell quietly, the kind that don't get a lot of attention. And maybe that's exactly why they stick with you. We've got 6 stories lined up today, and they're going to go back to back. So get comfortable. Turn the lights down if you want. I'd say grab a snack. But honestly, depending on your stomach, maybe wait until after. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Genuinely helps more than you know, and I've got a lot more of this kind of thing planned. Okay, let's go. Story 1, The Third Tent. There's a detail most people do and know about wilderness search and rescue operations. In roughly 1 in 5 missing persons cases in forested areas, the individual is found within 2 miles of where they disappeared. 2 miles. The distance you could walk in under an hour. But somehow, they couldn't find their way back. This story was originally posted to a hiking subreddit about 4 years ago under the username trailheadterry_PDX. The original post was titled something like, "I need to tell someone what happened at Olally Lake, because I haven't been able to sleep since." The thread got a modest amount of attention at the time, a few hundred upvotes, and then kind of faded. Into the archives, the way things do online, I found it while doing a deep dive on Pacific Northwest camping incidents, cross-referencing it with a local Oregon outdoor blog that had briefly mentioned an unexplained incident at the same campground around the same time frame. The details matched well enough that I felt comfortable including it here. Terry, the poster, was an experienced backpacker. It was clear about that, not in a bragging way, just contextually important. He'd been camping solo and with groups since he was a kid, had done the Wonderland Trail, sections of the PCT, multi-night trips in the Cascades. He knew how to read weather, how to hang a bear canister, how to stay calm when something went wrong. He was not, as he put it, someone who spooked easily. In the summer of what he called 3 or 4 years ago, he planned a 4-night trip to Olally Lake in the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. It's a beautiful area. Volcanic landscape, old-growth trees, lake with a reflection of Mount Jefferson that looks almost fake. It's so perfect. He'd been there before, knew the campground layout, had a preferred site near the eastern edge of the lake where the trees thinned out just enough to give you a sky view. He went with 2 friends, a woman named Dana and a man he called Marcus. Both were experienced campers in their own right, though neither had quite the mileage Terry did. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon, set up camp before dark, had a good first night. Fire, food, the usual comfortable silence that settles in when you're genuinely away from everything. It was the second night when Terry noticed the third tent. Their campsite had room for maybe 4 or 5 tents if you packed them in. But they'd spread out Terry's tent on the left, Dana's in the middle, Marcus's on the right, with a gap of about 15 feet between each. There was no neighboring campsite that close. The nearest one was maybe 60 feet through the trees, and it had been empty when they arrived. He woke up at around 2 in the morning needing to use the bathroom. He unzipped his tent, clicked on his headlamp, stepped out, and saw it. About 20 feet beyond Marcus's tent, just at the tree line, there was a tent, a small one. Single person, dark green or gray, hard to tell in the dark. No light coming from inside, no sound. His first reaction was completely mundane. He figured someone had come in late and set up nearby, which wasn't that unusual in a popular campground, even if it was a little close for camping etiquette. He made a mental note to maybe say something in the morning, did his business, and went back to sleep. In the morning, the tent was gone. He asked Dana and Marcus if they'd seen it. Marcus had slept through the night and noticed nothing. Dana said she thought she'd heard something around 2 or 3 a.m. She'd described it as like someone dragging something across the ground, but had assumed it was an animal and gone back to sleep. Terry spent a good part of that morning poking around the tree line near where he'd seen the tent. He found ground that looked disturbed, pine needles pressed flat in a rough rectangular shape, about the right size for a one-person tent, and around that impression he found footprints, not boot prints. Bare feet leading from the tent, impression toward the lake, and then stopping. Like whoever it was had walked into the water. He told himself there were rational explanations. Someone had camped there briefly and moved on early. The bare footprints were from a different time, a different person. The stopping at the lake part was just where the soft ground ended and the harder rocky shore began. The prints simply didn't show anymore. He mostly believed this. Mostly. The third night, he didn't sleep well. Kept waking up and looking out his tent mesh at the tree line. Nothing. At around 3 a.m., he finally fell into a deeper sleep and woke up to Marcus shaking his shoulder. Hard. "There's someone outside," Marcus whispered. Terry grabbed his headlamp and unzipped. The tent was back. Same position, same dark nylon, and this time there was a shape inside it, not moving. Just there. The profile of someone sitting upright. The three of them stood outside their tents in the dark, looking at it. Terry called out, "Hey! Hey, you okay over there?" Nothing. Marcus picked up a long stick, which Terry said in retrospect was both brave and completely useless, and they walked toward it together. When they were about 10 feet away, whatever was inside the tent shifted, not dramatically, just a slow lean, like someone adjusting their weight. And then Terry heard something he said he's never been able to adequately describe. He used the word exhaling, but said that wasn't quite right. It was more like the sound of air being let out of something slow and deliberate and wrong in a way he could unpin down. They stopped walking. And then the shape inside the tent went still again. They retreated to their camp. They built the fire back up. No one slept. When the sky started to lighten around 5 a.m., Dana grabbed her camera. She was an amateur photographer and walked toward the tree line. She came back very quickly and said the tent was empty. Just a collapsed tent, zipped shut, sitting there. They broke camp in under an hour. Left that morning, Terry said they never talked about whether to stay and investigate or go back to sleep or call someone. They just started packing. All three of them in silent, unanimous agreement. He went back to Olally Lake once, about a year later with a different group of friends. He didn't tell them what had happened, said the trip was completely normal and fine. But when they set up camp, he found himself counting the tents repeatedly, making sure the number was right. He never figured out what was in that tent. He said what bothered him most wasn't the fear he'd felt in the moment.
Ow.
It was the sitting. Whatever was inside that tent was sitting upright. And it had stayed sitting through everything, through being called out to, through three people walking toward it, through all of it. Just sitting and waiting. Terry ended his post with a line that I keep coming back to. He wrote, "I don't know if it was a person or something else. I'm not sure which answer would be more disturbing. Neither am I, Terry." Story 2. What the signal camera caught. Here's something that most casual hikers don't realize. Many national forest campgrounds in the United States are monitored by remote wildlife. Cameras, the kind with motion sensors that are used to track animal migration, monitor fire risk, and occasionally assist in search and rescue. These cameras capture thousands of images a week, and the vast majority are never reviewed by a human being. They're just stored, logged, filed away. This next story came to me through an unexpected route. A woman I'll call Renata. She asked me not to use her real name. Reached out through the channel's contact form about 8 months ago. She included a detailed account of what happened to her and her partner during a camping trip in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois, along with a reference to a FOIA request she'd filed with the U.S. Forest Service to obtain wildlife camera footage from the area around their campsite. The FOIA request came back partially redacted, which is a detail I want you to keep in mind. Renata and her partner, whom she called Jay, were not hardcore outdoorsy types. They were casual campers, the kind who go a few times a year, like the idea of nature without necessarily wanting to go too deep into it. Shawnee was a compromise. Beautiful landscape, easy trails, developed campgrounds with bathrooms and fire rings. A comfortable adventure. They arrived on a Friday evening in early October. The campground was mostly empty. Late in the season, the summer crowds long gone. They set up their tent, made dinner over the camp stove, watched the stars come out. By 10 p.m. they were both asleep. Jay woke Renata up sometime after midnight. He'd heard something outside. She described what he told her, a repeated sound, low and rhythmic, that he couldn't identify. Not an animal exactly, not mechanical, something in between. He said it reminded him of the sound a door makes when the wind blows it, and it hits the frame repeatedly, that soft, padded thudding, except it was out in the open and there were no doors. Renata listened. She heard nothing at first, then she did. He was right. It was rhythmic, patient. She had the instinct that a lot of people report in these situations, which is that whatever was making that sound was close enough that it had to be aware they were there. They lay still for a long time, listening. Eventually it stopped. They didn't sleep much for the rest of the night. In the morning, they found the perimeter of their campsite, and I want you to understand this was a very clearly defined campsite with a gravel pad and a ring of large stones around it. They found that something had been dragging or pressing against the ground just outside that stone ring, all the way around, as if something had circled their entire camp. The disturbed ground was consistent, and in the softer soil near a small drainage ditch, there were impressions that Renata photographed. She described them as large, flat depressions, not paw prints, not boot prints, not like anything she could identify. They told the camp host, who was a friendly older man who managed the site seasonally. He listened politely and said animals circling campsites wasn't unheard of, that black bears in the area had gotten bolder in recent years. He seemed unconcerned. They stayed a second night because neither of them wanted to seem like they were overreacting, which Renata said in retrospect was exactly the kind of logic that gets people into trouble. The second night was worse, not because they heard more sounds they didn't, not clearly, but because at some point in the night, Renata woke up and looked at the tent wall and saw a shadow, a large shadow, cast by the moonlight on the outside of the tent. The shape was not animal. It was not a tree or a branch. It was upright, proportioned, like a person, standing a few feet from the tent, facing them. She did not move. She did not wake Jay. She lay there and watched the shadow for what she estimated was between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. She genuinely wasn't sure. Time had gone strange, and then the shadow moved. Not dramatically, just turned slowly and was gone. She woke Jay up then, told him what she'd seen. He checked outside, nothing. No one there. No sounds, nothing. They left before dawn. The part of this story that I found genuinely unsettling is what came after. Renata, who works in a professional context that made her comfortable navigating bureaucratic systems, filed the FOIA request about 3 months after the trip. She wanted to see if the wildlife cameras had captured anything. She specified the campsite number, the dates, the approximate camera locations based on the markers she'd noticed in the area. She received a response about 4 months later. Several images were released to her from that weekend. The majority were deer, raccoons, one image of what appeared to be a coyote at the edge of the frame. There was one image from the early hours of their second night, time-stamped around 2 a.m., that the agency had redacted. It's blacked out entirely. The accompanying letter cited a standard exemption, material related to ongoing or potential law enforcement investigations. She pushed back, filed a follow-up inquiry. The response confirmed only that the exemption had been applied appropriately and that no further information could be released. She never found out what was in that image. I asked Renata if she had any theories. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "The thing that bothers me isn't the shadow. It's that whatever it was just stood there. It wasn't doing anything, it was just watching. And something about that feels more intentional than anything an animal would do." She hasn't been camping since. Story 3. Echo Camp. Before we continue, if you're listening to this at home and you're enjoying the series, please do hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time. I've got a lot more of this planned, and I'd love for you to be here for it. Okay, Story 3. There's a documented psychological phenomenon called the forest effect. It's not an official clinical term, but it's been written about in wilderness medicine journals to describe a particular kind of cognitive distortion that can occur when people spend extended time in dense, enclosed forest environments. Symptoms can include mild auditory hallucinations, distorted sense of time, and a persistent feeling of being observed. Most researchers attribute it to sensory deprivation combined with hypervigilance. It has a rational explanation. I want you to keep that in mind for this story because you might need it. This account was shared on a private hiking forum sometime in 2021. The forum itself has since gone offline. But someone had archived several threads before it did, and this one was included in a collection that a friend passed along to me. The original poster went by the handle Night Hikes Only and gave enough specific geographic details. The Adirondacks, a remote Leonto site, the month of September, that I was able to cross-reference with public trail registers from the area. A group matching the description did sign in to the area during the relevant period. There were 4 of them. Night Hikes Only, I'll just call him N, was the trip planner, the one who knew the trail best. The others were a married couple he'd camped with before and a friend of theirs who was joining for the first time. Ian didn't give the new friend a name in his post, which seemed deliberate. I'll respect that by referring to her as the 4th. The plan was to hike in to a remote Leonto, about 7 miles from the trailhead, spend 2 nights, hike out. Classic Adirondack backcountry trip. The trail was well marked. The weather forecast was good. There was nothing about the plan that should have gone wrong. The first thing that felt off, In wrote, was on the hike in. About 4 miles into the trail, they stopped for a water break near a stream crossing. While they were resting, and heard his name. His actual name, not his trail name. He was clear about this distinction. He heard someone say it from somewhere off in the trees to their left. Just once, very clearly. His full first name. He asked the others if they'd said anything. They hadn't. He wrote it off as trail audio, which is a real thing. Sound travels oddly in forests due to how trees deflect and channel it. But he noticed. They reached the lean-to by late afternoon. It was empty, as expected, and in good shape. They settled in, made dinner, had a comfortable first evening. The married couple were in the lean-to itself. N and the 4th had pitched tents nearby. The second morning, N woke up to a sound he spent several paragraphs trying to describe, and I want to read, or rather, summarize his description as carefully as I can. He called it an echo that didn't have an original sound. Or he explained it. He would hear a sound, footsteps on leaves. A branch snapping, once what sounded like someone setting down a heavy pack, but only as if they were the echo. The original sound was absent, just the faint trailing reverberation of something that should have happened. He pointed this out to the others later in the day. The couple said they'd noticed something, but had assumed it was the forest acoustics. The 4th, and this is the part that Unn circled back to several times in his post, the 4th had a different reaction. She said, very quietly and very seriously, that she'd been hearing it since they arrived. Since they'd come within about a mile of the camp, actually, and that it wasn't random sounds. The sounds she was hearing were specifically sounds from earlier in their trip she was hearing. She said echoes of their own camp sounds from the night before. Their cooking, their conversation, their footsteps around the camp. N didn't know what to do with this. He was a rational person, he said. He didn't want to validate something that might just be anxiety or suggestion. But the fourth was also calm, not scared, not unhinged, just certain. She said it was like the woods were playing back a recording. The second night, N stayed up well past the others. He sat at the edge of the lean-to with his headlamp off, just listening. And around midnight, he heard it unmistakably, the sound of a zipper. A tent zipper, clear as anything. And then, about 30 seconds later, footsteps on dry leaves. And then the sound of someone pouring water. He checked. Both tents were zipped closed. No one was outside. The campsite was undisturbed. He went back to his sleeping bag and lay there listening until dawn. The fourth woke him up at first light and told him she wanted to leave, not finish the second night, not hike out casually, leave now in the morning, get out of the area. She wasn't panicked. She was just decided. N didn't argue. They hiked out that morning. The sounds continued for the first mile or two, the echoes without sources, and then faded as they got further from the lean-to. In the trailhead parking lot, while they were loading the cars, Ina asked the fourth what she thought was happening. She thought about it for a moment. She said, "I think that place remembers things. And I don't want it to remember us." He never went back to that lean-to. The married couple did the following year and reported nothing unusual. The fourth declined to go. In's last line in the thread was this: "I've thought about that trip a lot. And the part I keep coming back to isn't the sounds. It's that she wasn't afraid. She was just done. Sometimes I think she understood something the rest of us were too skeptical to." Story 4. The Ranger Station Logbook. Here's a fact that might recalibrate your sense of wilderness safety. In the United States alone, an average of over 1,500 people are reported missing in national parks and forests every single year. Most are found within days, but a significant portion, remain open cases. And the circumstances of many of these disappearances are never fully explained. What I'm about to share with you started as a tip. Someone who works in a support role for a state forestry department in the Pacific Northwest. They contacted me through a mutual connection about 6 months ago. They didn't want to go on record, and I want to be clear that what I'm sharing is their account of what they witnessed, which I have no way to independently verify beyond the internal consistency of the story and a few corroborating details they provided that I was able to partially confirm. They told me about a ranger station in a remote section of their state. They didn't want to give the exact location that had been in intermittent use since the 1970s. Not a full-time staffed station, more of a seasonal outpost. Volunteers and rangers would cycle through during fire season and occasionally during winter for snowpack monitoring. There was a logbook, the old-fashioned paper kind, where everyone who passed through would sign in, note conditions, log any unusual activity. The person I spoke with was tasked, about 2 years ago, with digitizing the contents of several old logbooks from stations across the region as part of an archival project. Routine work. Most of the entries were weather data, trail condition reports, occasional notes about equipment status, standard stuff. But in the logbook for this particular station, covering a period of about 15 years in the 1990s and 2000s, they found a cluster of entries that didn't fit the pattern. It's not from one person, from several different rangers over a span of about a decade, all describing variations of the same experience. I'm going to paraphrase the entries as they were described to me. The first was from late October in what was probably 1994. A ranger on a solo overnight. Stay wrote that she had heard someone walking on the roof of the station beginning at around 11 p.m. and continuing, intermittently, until nearly 2 a.m. She checked outside multiple times and found nothing. She noted the roof was metal and that the footstep sounds were clear and deliberate, not branches, not animals. The second, from a different ranger, about 3 years later, spent the night here, all quiet until after midnight. Heard a knocking on the south wall. Checked multiple times. Nothing visible. Knocking continued for about 45 minutes and stopped. I am noting this in case others have had a similar experience. A third, undated but from the handwriting analysis the person I spoke with did. Appearing to be from around 2001, there is something here at night. I have stayed here twice before, and each time after midnight, something moves around the outside of the station. I do not believe it is an animal. Bears have been present in this area, and I know what they sound like. This is different. This moves in a pattern, around the building, the same direction each time. I am going to ask around and see if anyone else has noted this. And then, the one that apparently made my source actually pause in their digitization work and reread. An entry from a volunteer logger, sometime around 2004. Just 3 sentences. Woke up at 3 a.m. There was something looking in through the east window. I did not go outside. I will not be returning to this station. My source told me that when they brought these entries to their supervisor's attention, the supervisor reviewed them and then said almost exactly, they told me, yeah, that one has a reputation. We don't staff it overnight anymore. And then the conversation ended. No elaboration. No incident report attached to the file. No explanation of when or why the overnight policy had changed. The station, to their knowledge, is still standing, still logged in the system. It's just not used. My source ended our conversation with something that's been sitting with me. They said, the thing that bothered me most wasn't any one entry. It was that they all wrote about it the same way. These are professional people, trained observers. None of them tried to explain it. They just documented it. It's like they knew the documentation was the only thing they could do. Story 5. For Days on the Kenai. We're almost at the end of our series now. One more story after this one. If you've been with me all the way through, thank you. That genuinely means a lot. If you haven't already, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would mean the world. Okay, onward. The Kenai Peninsula in Alaska is one of the most remote and genuinely wild stretches of landscape in the United States. It's beautiful in a way that feels slightly hostile. The mountains, the glaciers, the rivers teeming with salmon. But it's also a place where the wilderness is not performing for you. It doesn't care you're there. That distinction matters. This story was originally shared as part of a long post on a small Alaska outdoors community forum sometime in 2019 or 2020. The poster's username was something like Kena Kayaker, and the post was titled, What Happened to Us Last Summer and Why I Want to Tell Somebody. It was shared a few times in broader forums, but never went particularly viral. I've reconstructed it from notes I took when I first read it, and from a cached version of the thread that a research contact was able to pull for me. The group was for people. The poster, who I'll call K, and 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all experienced backcountry travelers, all with Alaskan wilderness experience specifically. They planned a 4-night backpacking trip in a remote section of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge, accessible only by float plane, no trails. Navigate by topo map and river features. The kind of trip that requires experience and confidence, and they had both. The float plane dropped them at a small lake, and they had 4 days to reach their extraction point about 18 miles away on foot. This kind of unstructured wilderness navigation is common among experienced Alaska backcountry travelers. They had bear spray. They had a satellite communicator. They knew what they were doing. Days 1 and 2 were everything they'd hoped for. The landscape was staggering. They fished the river, made good mileage, saw a brown bear at a distance, watched it do what bears do, and move on. Moose in the willows, eagles overhead, perfect. The 3rd night was when it started. They'd camped on a gravel bar beside a river, which is common practice in Alaska, flat, dry, and keeps you away from the dense brush where bears travel. Good sight lines in all directions. They'd hung their food properly and done everything right. Kay was the last one asleep. Said he had an inexplicable sense of being watched, Not the ambient awareness you can sometimes feel in wild places, but something more directed. It's like something specific had turned its attention to them. He wrote that he sat outside the tent longer than he usually would, just watching the edge of the spruce tree line on the opposite bank. Nothing moved. He eventually went to bed. At some point in the night, he couldn't be sure when, he became aware of a sound. He described it as breathing, not the breathing of the person next to him. Something outside, slow and very deep, like the respiration of something much larger than a human being. He lay still and listened. It continued for what he felt was a long time. Then it stopped. In the morning, he mentioned it. The woman in the group, he called her M throughout his account, said she'd heard it too. She'd assumed it was a bear. But when they checked the gravel bar around their tent, there were no tracks. Bears leave tracks on gravel bars. They press hard. You find them. There were none. The fourth night, their last night before the extraction lake, was harder. They camped earlier than planned because M said she'd been hearing something following them since mid-afternoon. K confirmed that he'd had the same sense, the feeling that something was paralleling them through the brush, about 50 to 100 feet off to the east, keeping pace. They'd seen nothing. No movement, no sound they could identify. Just the feeling. They made camp in a clearing with good visibility and kept the fire going hot. 2 of them stayed up in shifts through the night. Kay was on watch from midnight to about 3 a.m., and he wrote, "And this is the section I keep returning to, that at around 2 in the morning, standing at the edge of the firelight with his headlamp off, he heard footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, in the spruce about 30 meters from camp. He turned on his headlamp, aimed it at the tree line. He saw something between the trees. He was careful in how he described it. He didn't say what it was. He said a shape. Standing still, too large to be a person, and the wrong shape for a bear. It was there for long enough that he was certain he was seeing it and not imagining it. And then it was gone. Not running. Not crashing through brush the way a bear or moose would. Just gone. As if the darkness had closed around it. He didn't wake the others. He said later that his reasoning was strange and he couldn't fully explain it. He felt that drawing attention to it might make things worse. So he stood there until his shift was over, watching the tree line, and then woke the next person and said nothing, except it was quiet. They reached the extraction lake the following morning without incident. The float plane came on time. Kay said that when the plane lifted off the lake and they rose above the tree line, he and M looked at each other without speaking. He wrote, "We didn't talk about it on the plane, or on the drive home, or for several months afterward. When we finally did, she told me she'd been watching that same section of tree line from inside her tent, and she said she'd seen the shape too. She said it had stayed there longer than I probably knew." Kay ended his account with something practical and something that wasn't. The practical thing was, they still go to Alaska. They still do backcountry trips. They're not done with wild places. But they now always camp a second night in any remote location before they feel safe. Not because they think it helps. Just because they've come to believe that some places take a night to decide what they think of you. And they'd rather not be around for the decision. The other thing he wrote was this: "I'm a rational person. I don't believe in monsters. But I believe in things we haven't named yet. I think one of them was watching us." Story 6. The One Who Came Back. There is a type of rescue case that wilderness SAR teams quietly refer to, not in official reports, but in conversation, as a walkout. It's when a missing person emerges from the wilderness on their own. Sometimes days after their disappearance with no memory of where they've been or what happened to them. These cases are more common than most people realize, and they are, almost uniformly, deeply unsettling to the people who respond to them. This final story in our series is different from the others. It's not a story about something that happened during a camping trip. It's a story about what happened after. The account came to me in the most direct way any of these has. A woman named Claire, she gave me permission to use her first name, wrote to me about 18 months ago after she found the channel through a mutual friend who thought I might be interested in what she'd experienced. We've since spoken on 3 separate occasions. She's thoughtful, careful with words, and clearly still processing something she doesn't know how to categorize. I've agreed to not share identifying details beyond what she's comfortable with, which means I won't be naming the location. Claire went on a solo camping trip 3 years ago. Solo trips were not unusual for her. She'd been doing them for years. A weekend trip, a trailhead she'd used before, 2 nights in the backcountry at a spot she knew well. She left on a Friday morning. Her husband knew where she was going, as did a friend who was her emergency contact. She doesn't remember anything after Friday afternoon. She has a clear memory of arriving at the trailhead, of starting the hike in, of stopping at a particular viewpoint she liked about 2 miles up where you could see a mountain in the distance. She remembers sitting there, eating a snack, thinking that it was a good day to be alive, and then her memory stops. She woke up in a hospital on Sunday morning. She'd been found Saturday night by another hiker, walking out on the trail near the trailhead, nearly back to the parking lot in what the hiker described as a daze. She wasn't injured beyond minor cuts on her hands and feet. She was dehydrated. Her tent, her pack, and all her gear were gone. She was wearing the same clothes she'd started the hike in. Search and rescue located her campsite, or what she assumed was her campsite, about 3 miles in. Further than she'd planned to go, her tent had been set up. Her pack was there. Her food, her sleeping bag, everything. But she was missing and had no memory of any of it. She had a full medical evaluation. Neurologically, nothing explained the gap. No evidence of head injury, no signs of stroke, no indication of medication or substance involvement. The psychiatric evaluation found her to be fully oriented and without signs of any dissociative disorder. The doctors were, she said, thorough and genuinely puzzled. Over the following weeks, she had 2 experiences that she can only describe as partial memory fragments. Not dreams, she was clear about this distinction. More like images that surfaced while she was awake, doing ordinary things. The first was a face. She said it was a human face, but something about it was wrong in a way she couldn't isolate. She'd be washing dishes or driving, and suddenly she'd have the image of a face very close to hers, looking at her. No expression she recognized, just looking. The second was a sound. Intermittently over the following months, she would hear very faintly, usually in quiet moments, a sound she described as almost like a voice, but without the shapes of words, not speech. Something that wanted to be speech but wasn't quite. Both experiences have faded significantly over the past year or so. She's functional, happy even, by her own account. She's been in therapy, which has helped. Though her therapist has ultimately categorized the experience as a dissociative episode without identified cause, a kind of bureaucratic catch-all for we don't know. She's never gone on a solo camping trip since. She went with her husband once, about a year ago, to a completely different area. She said it was mostly fine, but that she spent the first night unable to sleep, just listening to the forest. I asked her what she was listening for. She thought about it for a long time. I don't know exactly, she said. Maybe I was listening to see if it sounds the same. Or maybe I was listening to see if something sounds like it knows me. She paused. The strangest part of all of it, and I know how this sounds, is that I don't feel like anything bad happened to me out there. I feel like something happened. Something I can't remember and can't explain, but I don't feel hurt by it. I almost feel like I was. She trailed off. Started again, like I was put back. I've thought about that conversation a lot. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not sure I want to. But I think that's maybe the most honest place to end a series like this, with something that doesn't resolve. With a story that keeps going after it's finished. Because that's how the real ones work, isn't it? That's all 6 of them. Camping trips that went wrong. I want to take a second and genuinely thank you for listening all the way through. I know this was a long one, that was kind of the point. I wanted to create something you could sink into, something that felt like sitting around a fire late at night when the conversation gets quiet and real. I hope it landed that way. If you're lying in bed right now with your headphones in, or sitting in a dark room, or doing dishes, or on a long drive wherever you are, thank you for spending this time with me. These kinds of stories matter to me, not just as horror but as documents of human experience, of the moments when the rational world we live in seems to creak at the edges a little. Please, if you enjoyed this, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it makes an enormous difference in helping this content reach more people. If you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. I put real work into this stuff, and I've got more coming, more series like this, more individual stories, more deep dives. You won't want to miss them. Leave a comment too if you want. I read every single one. Tell me which story got to you the most. Tell me if something similar has ever happened to you. Tell me if you think I'm crazy for spending time on this. I don't think I am, but then again, none of these people thought anything unusual would happen to them either. Sleep well. Stay safe out there.